I am a mega fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I've watched the series 11 times, and I still tear up thinking about Zuko and Iroh reuniting in the finale. As a child, I tried punching concrete to see if taking it head-on would unlock my earthbending abilities, and I nearly tried the squatting while holding burning leaf technique until my senses got the better of me. In short, I love this series, and because I love it, I hate to see it be needlessly remade and added to. And something I realized is that I feel the same way about these ATLA editions, as I'll call them, which include the live actions, The Legend of Korra, the comics, and the new stuff coming out. I feel the same way about these as I do situationships.
Time to break up.
To give an analogy, if I were to treat ATLA like the Bible, then all editions are apocrypha. The only true canon to me is ATLA books Water, Earth, and Fire. But once upon a time, I was different. I was open to editions, I was excited to watch The Legend of Korra, and I wanted to read the comics. But when I witnessed Korra lose connection to all the previous avatars, and when I learned that the comics treat Azula, the love of my life, as a simple lunatic, I knew we had lost the plot, and I was quickly radicalized. It's been years since I became an ATLA extremist, so I can no longer understand the allure behind these adjustments. Sure, on the supply side, it's very simple. These major corporations have proven that endless additions to beloved IP, despite public groaning, make money. And note, I'm talking about the businesses here, not the creative teams. I'm very confident that the animators, writers, and musicians are working their hardest for an ideal product. But they are subject to the business, and the business will set constraints that directly impact the final product. And virtually every single time, the final product is crappier. So what confuses me then is the demand side, because I actively do not demand this. So I've asked my friends who do why they're interested in new ATLA stuff, and here's some of what they said, paraphrased. I know Korra isn't as strong of a series, but there are some really good moments, like Zahir. I'm just excited for more content. I personally don't see anything wrong with expanding the universe. I'm curious to see more. I have felt such frustration with these comments, which makes me seem like the bad guy and anti-progress. But I don't think I'm the bad guy, and I'm here to argue why. To me, these comments are complacent when it comes to quality. They accept lesser editions because it's simply fun to get more stuff. And normally that isn't too big of an issue because most of the content we're consuming nowadays is low effort and average, if not straight slop. But it becomes an issue to me because you can make whatever you want, just leave ATLA out of it. Some people may push back saying, well, they aren't directly editing the OG. But friends, every canon edition tells us stories that we can't unknow. So for example, I don't like knowing that avatars after Korra can't access Aang, so I've rejected that story. It also erodes the overall IP's legacy, not to mention the opportunity cost of time and talent. So obviously, I am more passionate about this than most because I've watched the series so many times, and it's my favorite of all time, and even though I can now recognize the small flaws it has, there is basically nothing that's going to take it out of my number one spot. The thing is, I am not the first person on the planet to have ATLA as my favorite show. It's the favorite show of probably like 10% of Americans ages 18 through 35, so that's at least a few million people. And yet it is within this group that I find people most excited for ATLA Apocrypha. And that's obvious on one hand, because why would you be excited about new ATLA stuff if you didn't watch it originally anyway? The other side of this is heresy, because I don't understand how my fellow ATLA lovers could be excited to watch our boy be massacred again. And yeah, M. Night Shyamalan's movie was definitely the worst massacre, but has anything been much better? And some may disagree with that, but we can all agree that no edition has come near the caliber of the original and only canon. So in that sense, I'm dumbfounded. I just feel there should be a lot more radicalized ATLA fans. And thinking about this late one night, my mind jumped to situationships. It's another more recent phenomenon that's very popular among people in my age demographic, which overlaps heavily with the ATLA fan demographic. In a situationship, you accept a lesser experience for more time with the object of affection. It's very confusing, and something about it feels imprisoning, which is the same feeling I get from these ATLA editions. So here's what we're going to do in this video. First, I want to convince you that these two things are structurally the same. Next, I want to show you why it's a trap and why it's better to break up with it. And finally, we'll talk about how we can actually break up. First things first, in order to make the comparison, we need to define what situationships actually are, which ironically is the very thing people in situationships are not doing. But that aside, I dove into a few articles across the web, and here is what they came back with. According to the articles, the primary ingredient that distinguishes a situationship from a relationship is the lack of commitment. They are ambiguous by design and don't require the same vulnerability and authenticity of committed relationships. Instead, they only ask that you be present with the easy fun and intermittent dopamine they provide. I'd say that the ATLA editions give us the same things as situationships. Firstly, the convenient fun. You get more time in this universe with these characters you know and love, even if it's not the same quality as before. And it's kind of like continuing to see your Hinge match from last year, even though things are going nowhere because, hey, it's probably more fun than a first date, because those are always a gamble. Secondly, the dopamine is intermittent, because we know these editions are just as hit and miss as a first date. But sometimes there are good moments, and I won't even deny that. But that inconsistency breeds stronger dopamine responses, as the Attachment Project article called out with situationships. So it's kind of like a cheap drug. Thirdly, the lack of commitment and ambiguity. Of course, it's not like I can formalize some kind of commitment with the show, with the creative team, or even the media conglomerate behind it. Where the lack of commitment lies is to the bit, if you will. Because I thought we finished this. I thought we had closure. But now the book is being reopened and new pages being added, so I just feel confused. Like how people do in situationships. Now, what is the difference between an ATLA edition and a sequel? I have to take this aside for a moment, because I have no issue with sequels. And that might make you ask, am I just being a hypocrite? Well, I have 3 points, and I'll use How to Train Your Dragon and Kung Fu Panda as my examples because they are my favorite movies. And I didn't have an issue with their sequels, at least up until number 3 for Kung Fu Panda. Number 1, the end screen. ATLA literally has a the end screen. And every time I see it, my heart breaks because I know it's over. And then it's not actually over. How to Train Your Dragon and Kung Fu Panda, they don't have these giant the end screens. Nowhere was that intention to end once and for all, written down in giant font with gorgeous sweeping music backing it. You could say that one's a little pedantic. So moving on to number 2, the time between the OG and the new thing. The longer we get from the end, the more people feel licensed to go against the original intentions. So if How to Train Your Dragon 2 or Kung Fu Panda 2 came out 10 plus years after the original, I'd certainly be more skeptical. But I do have more grace for this one because the reason can be network and logistical issues behind the scenes. And as a person who is coming off as anti-progress, but is actually generally on the side of progress, I don't think original intentions should always be honored, because there are a lot of subpar original intentions. On the point of intentions, I would be remiss not to acknowledge that the OG creators have been involved in some of these editions. But based on what I've seen, OG authorship doesn't give you a hall pass. OG creators can dilute their own work by their own hand and or because of conflicts with the business. And that brings me to number 3, the feeling, the vibe. The end screen and the time between are not hard and fast rules. What it comes down to is something that I think is beyond words. Because sometimes you just know when it's over. You know when you've reached the point where anything more means diminishing returns, if not loss of remembrance. If you haven't reached that point, then you have a sequel. If you have an edition. I think humans just can sense this intuitively as intelligent, emotional, and social creatures. That's why we can even delineate between situationships and relationships, because on paper you're doing all of the same things, but we all know there's a difference. Both situationships and ATLA editions ask that we simply stay present and in the moment. Don't worry about where we're going with it or that feeling of closure from the past. Just focus on the fun now. Those words themselves are innocuous, but the vibe feels imprisoning, like a trap. Now, is it really that deep? In reality, no. We're all going to die, so if you want to enjoy your show, by all means, enjoy your show. At the same time, We are spending our limited time and resources on derivative entertainment because it's attached itself to something that was awe-inspiring. To be clear, I'm not saying there is never a time or place for cheap entertainment. I also don't mean to attribute any ill will to the people making editions, not the creative teams, and honestly, not even the businesses. Because in our economy, they need to make money. And if the difference between needing to do layoffs and not is a few reheats, I might do it. But you don't need ill will to end up trapped. Even with good intentions, both situationships and additions to beloved franchises share an inevitable downward spiral into an end state that is hard to climb out of. So let's talk about the inevitability of the downward spiral. Because we can all agree that it exists because we've likely seen or experienced situationship shower, and we've likely seen or experienced media buckling under the weight of needless, increasingly low-quality additions. Is that inevitable, though? Because something the articles seem to like highlighting is that situationships can actually be good and fun. And my friends clearly seem to enjoy the ATLA edition, so Ifechi, can't you just let people have fun? Well, that's actually the wrong question to ask. It's not about whether I will let the people have fun. It's about whether they themselves will still be having fun as time goes on. The answer to that is no. And it's not me saying no, it's Aristotle. According to him, the human being is made to change and cause change. This is so because everything, living or not, has an inherent end toward which it naturally develops, and this is called the final cause, or telos. Our universal final cause is pure actuality, which is the state of having no potential, being fully realized, self-sufficient, permanent, and complete. This pure actuality is God in a few philosophies. The eternal innate attraction toward pure actuality keeps the universe in a perpetual state of flux and motion. For us mere humans, then, until we reach our final cause, we will inevitably change. But situationships, and therefore the ATLA editions in my argument, stagnate by design. So here's a quote from one of the articles, quoting, I believe, a psychology professor from Stanford. I'll put it up on the screen. Relationships can have varying degrees of intimacy, passion, and commitment at any given time. So it suggested that situationships are love with high intimacy and passion, but low commitment. Sternberg, the psychologist, suggests that romantic love evolves as passion declines and commitment increases. So if commitment does not increase, romantic love is stagnant. So instead of evolving to actuality, the human modus operandi, things evolve to stasis, a trap. What makes the trap even more imprisoning is that the journey to it isn't even a straight line, because at least that would be efficient. Instead, it's a downward spiral. The articles highlight that situationships often go bad because one party starts to want more than the other, which is only inevitable. Calling back to my radicalization, I'd say our relationship to ATLA editions goes bad when the viewer starts to want more than what an edition can reasonably achieve. The setup then becomes like two bulls under one yoke, but one bull is pushing and the other is not, or at least not as much, so they go in a circle. And as the ground wears away, the circle becomes a downward spiral. But even as things are falling apart, we pretend to be nonchalant about it. So as noted before, situationships don't make space for the vulnerability and authenticity to ask for what you want and be honest about how you feel. You just have to act cool with everything. When it comes to the ATLA editions, I hypothesize that it's less so feigned nonchalance and more just a throwing up the hands, because what did you expect? It was never going to be that good. And finally, you're at the bottom of the spiral, and many choose to stay there. So, citing the earlier articles, the most common reasons for staying in situationships are the potential of something more and the fear of losing the little you have. This is not hope. This is cope and wishful thinking. So hope is confident expectation. Hope is active and works towards what one is hoping for. Cope is failing to accept reality for what it is, telling yourself it's actually fine, and taking hits of dopamine to numb yourself to ensure you don't wake up to the truth. In this stagnant copeful state, your natural desire to change manifests as wishful thinking. There's no reason to think things would or should change other than the fact that you want them to. Is this not how people feel about the ATLA editions? Flashing back to my friend's quotes, there's no confident expectation that these will be good. Instead, the editions themselves are consumed as nostalgic cope. And of course, there's wishful thinking because we all want it to be good. Heck, even I want it to be good. I'd be down to be made a hypocrite here because if there was something amazing to witness in my favorite universe, I'll be watching. But I can't see that being the case. Okay, am I just being a pessimist here? It is not beyond me to get into a complaining mood. Plus, I'm not the one making these additions, so I can't know for sure whether they'll be amazing or not. Honestly, I don't think I'm being a pessimist. Firstly, the track record. We've seen things. We've witnessed things. We know the lows. Secondly, the excellence of ATLA. We've seen things. We've witnessed things. We know the highs and how hard it is to attain that. People could point to counterexamples like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood and the Spider-Verse movies. I think that's fair enough, but I would argue that those are different from the ATLA editions. FMAB was made to literally fix the known issues in FMA. And with the Spider-Verse movies, Spider-Man is just built for remakes with decades of reboots and spin-offs at this point. Those OGs didn't reach the point of diminishing returns, so their follow-ups had a real shot of being good, and the creative teams crushed it. ATLA is not that. So there's a third thing that doesn't depend on execution that gives me some confidence in my statement that an ATLA edition won't be that good. Freedom. Now, hear me out. The articles like to highlight one positive of situationships being freedom. So here are some quotes that sum this up really well. Situationships might not be our enemy after all. Rather, they may be setting us free. Free to explore, free to fall, and free to love. Situationships provide physical and emotional intimacy without the expectation that you meet their parents. You don't have to negotiate the holidays. You don't have to include them in your plans. You can do what works best for you. Rather than seeing situationships as a trap to be avoided, daters are now embracing the idea that some relationships don't need to be rigidly defined. Staying open to people who may not be exactly aligned with your initial dating goal makes things a little easier and way more fun. On one hand, I get what these quotes are getting at. A real relationship ties you down with exclusivity and expectations and compromises. A situationship lives in that ambiguous gray zone where you can straddle commitment and non-commitment and get the best of both worlds. On the other hand, I find these arguments for situationships, dare I say, delusional. Because I don't think people are interested in the theoretical freedom that they offer. For example, if I put two options in front of you, one, a convenient situationship that lets you physically and or emotionally booty call someone at any time. This someone is attractive and you enjoy spending time with them, but you are not deeply in love with them, and even if you were, there's no potential for a real future with them. Or two, simply a committed relationship with someone you deeply love. At least everyone I know would choose the second option. But to play devil's advocate for a moment, maybe there's two kinds of people who would pick option one. First, someone fresh off a breakup who wants to rebound. Okay, sure, but this is not a baseline state. It is triggered by a stressor, which eventually evens out. Second, the Psychology Today article points out that situationships could work well for someone who's focused on career or personal goals, aka they don't have the time for something super serious. And I have personal beef with this one. I disagree with the article's take here, and I'll come to why in a minute. But to sum up my thoughts for now, when I hear that the benefit of situationships is freedom, I'm like, freedom for what? You get to be in a setup that people agree is not very good. And sure, you get to opt out of some responsibilities, and you also don't have to be very vulnerable, but do people truly want to be free of that? Because if so, they wouldn't like option number two, but they do. In a similar vein, I feel like most people would prefer the creation of a new show that follows lovable characters in an interesting universe through an amazing plot over a superfluous addition to an IP that is already complete. If it's an option, people may default to the latter because it's easy dopamine, but net, I think people prefer the former even though it entails much more effort both on the viewer side and, of course, on the creator side. Now, with all that being said, let's take it back to freedom being the reason that an ATLA edition won't be very good. I don't mean the Hakuna Matata kind of freedom that the situationship articles talk about, aka freedom from commitment and vulnerability that a serious relationship requires, or as someone who feels very strongly about the shows I love, that a serious watch requires. I instead mean a more holistic kind of freedom, and that's the freedom to choose the ideal option when presented with multiple choices. It means not being held back by lesser options so that you are free to commit to the best one. In the tradition of St. Ignatius, this is called internal freedom or interior freedom, and I explore this in depth in my orb video. But in short, when you have internal freedom, you are able to choose wisely. So let's now circle back to that goal-oriented person for whom psychology today endorses situationships. The reason I disagree with the recommendation is because I strongly presume that this person wants to accomplish their goal and then end up with that committed and loving relationship. They may engage in suboptimal situationships along the way because, in the words of Dua Lipa, maybe the only reason you're holding me tonight is we're scared to be lonely. Loneliness, lust, and desire for validation limit internal freedom to pursue the, in my opinion, better plan. So now flash to us ATLA fans. When considering whether to support additions to the story, should we spend our time on content we know is going to, in some way, weaken the IP in our minds, or repurpose that time for a new story that could be glorious in its own right? Y'all know my answer. For others, the convenient fun and nostalgia might pull them in. But much more than the fans, my eyes turn more towards the producers. These people have millions of dollars to invest in creating content. They could use those resources on new IP, or they could make another ATLA thing. Whichever option they choose, the creative teams can do a great job. But fundamentally, when debating between doing something new and reheating ATLA nachos, I think something new and committing to making that new thing wonderful is a categorically better choice. And yet, I fear that the expectation of endless growth, poor management, corporate greed, fear, and ego limit the internal freedom of the producers to choose the ideal option. But at present, I don't think anyone can stop the factory line of remakes and additions. Disney has set the precedent that this is profitable and relatively easy, and the corporate machine generally squeezes trends dry before pivoting. There's not much my complaining can do about that. People much, much larger than me have been complaining for much, much longer, and yet here we are. Instead, I want to focus on what we can do. Because in a very similar fashion, situationships are ubiquitously available in the world of modern dating. It's up to us whether to opt into that spiral or to stay the course. If we want to stay the course, we need to know what we're up against. While I've talked a lot about the allure of convenient fun and pleasure, I don't think that's the prime thing we are facing, because that's not new, whereas endless remakes and additions and situationships are. What I think we're up against is entropy. Hear me out. I think we've been undergoing a breakdown of order that is affecting things that were once sacred in these postmodern times. I am not the best person to explain this, but I have a cool, smart friend who wrote some sick articles about postmodernism and quantum physics and Descartes that explain this very well, so I'll link those below. In sum, the primary movement of postmodernism was the dismantling of metastructure. Metastructures being universally applicable, higher order conceptual structures, such as ethics, theology, tradition, things like that. Dismantling metastructures involved exposing them as human constructs, thereby undermining their claims to reflect a fundamental reality. I'll say that I don't think all deconstruction is bad. The articles even point out that some metastructures have supported things like oppression and likely many more evils. I am pro dismantling evil, as a matter of fact. But sometimes it feels like things are being broken down arbitrarily and for no clear gain outside of promises of freedom that I'm not sure anyone wants, aka entropy. When we trade constructs that provide meaning for chaos, to continue quoting the articles, the modern subject is now unbound, facing a world where stable horizons have disappeared at the same time as everything seems possible. Perfect examples of this include situationships, the deconstructed version of relationships, and endless additions, the messy, deconstructed version of how to remember a beloved franchise. Knowing that this entropy is chomping at the bit on many things that were once held dear, what can ground us is our own principles or rules of engagement. We should not accept what the world, in this case dating apps and major media conglomerates are giving us wholesale. We should scrutinize whether what they are offering us is good or not. Not exercising the responsibility means relinquishing freedom, despite claims of freedom from the other side, and sooner falling into the trap. But in exercising this responsibility, we may very well find that we have to go without. We have to break up with our situationship. We have to break up with ATLA editions. And that's hard. But in that space of lack, there is room for something real to emerge. For a relationship that actually goes somewhere. For a new story to fall in love with. Or for falling in love again with a familiar one. 11 times and counting. Well, hopefully I won't be made a hypocrite in all of this. Only time will tell. Yeah. See you in an hour.